Alexander the Great is one of the most famous individuals in history. He was so significant that people in his own time were fascinated with his accomplishments. That fascination hasn't let up over the intervening 23 centuries, and every year you can find new biographies of him. His popularity has waxed and waned over time, and is usually a reflection of the values of the societies that study him. One thing is certain, though. Nobody can dispute that Alexander accomplished an incredible amount during his 13-year reign as King of Macedonia. The question we would like to ask is, was what he did inevitable? When you consider all the advantages that Alexander was handed in life, was it inevitable that he would do what he did? Could someone else have accomplished those things? Or was it something that only Alexander could do? So what exactly did Alexander inherit that made him such a force? We have come up with 6 reasons that help explain why Alexander was so successful at conquering. Let's take each one of these in turn, starting with Alexander's parents. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was an extremely formidable and interesting individual. She was the daughter of Neoptolemus, the king of Epirus. She met her husband, Philip II, on the island of Samothrace, where they were both partaking in a religious ceremony. Although there was an initial attraction between the two, their marriage was primarily political in nature, as it granted Philip an alliance with Epirus. A few nights after their wedding, Philip witnessed Olympias sleeping with snakes, presumably due to her being a devoted worshiper to a snake cult for Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and ecstasy. After this incident, Philip lost affection for her. Plutarch notes that Philip did not sleep with her after that.
Because he feared that some spells and enchantments might be practiced upon him by her, or because he shrank from her embraces in the conviction that she was the partner of a superior being.
While a seemingly minor incident, it fostered a belief in Alexander that he wasn't really the son of Philip, but the son of Zeus. Olympias' goal in life was to see her son sit upon the throne of Macedonia. After Philip's assassination, people immediately suspected that Olympias was behind it. There is no proof for that, but she did get to see her son become king. As Alexander was making his final preparations to leave for Persia, it was said that she took Alexander aside to speak to him alone. Many believed that she told him that he was not the son of Philip, but was of divine parentage. This would have a major effect on Alexander down the line, as he would pause his campaign to try to get answers as to who was his true father. He may have believed he was the son of a god, but he claimed his legitimacy as king of Macedon through his biological father, Philip II. Philip II of Macedon was not born to be king. He had 2 older brothers, and it wasn't a given that he would take the throne. There was a rare confluence of factors that saw both of his older brothers become king and quickly die in succession, leaving only Philip as a strong candidate for the king of Macedonia at only 23. When he became king, Philip made a lot of reforms to the military. We'll go into more detail when Philip gets his own video, but one of the biggest changes he made was simply turning the Macedonians into a fully professional army that was paid on time. Slowly, Philip laid the groundwork that enabled Alexander to become the man that we all know and recognize as great. As influential as his parents were, was that enough for him to be able to claim the title Lord of all Asia? Or was there something more? The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It caught fire and burned down on July 21st, 356, the same day that Alexander was born. Remembering that Artemis was the goddess of childbirth, Plutarch noted,
It was this coincidence which inspired Hegesias and Magnesia to utter a joke which was flat enough to have put the fire out. He said it was no wonder the temple of Artemis was destroyed, since the goddess was busy attending to the birth of Alexander. But those of the Magi, who were then at Ephesus, interpreted the destruction of the temple as the portent of a far greater disaster, and they ran through the city, beating their faces and crying out that that day had brought forth a great scourge and calamity for Asia.
It is important to remember that in Greek mythology, heroes are born, not made. The Iliad is full of heroes of semi-divine parentage. This includes Achilles, the greatest of them all. He was Alexander's role model and also a direct ancestor through his mother's family. Other mythological characters with semi-divine origin included Heracles, who was also a direct ancestor of Alexander, this time through his father's line. Whether or not he had semi-divine ancestors isn't the point. Alexander believed he did, and this belief affected the way he lived his life. Plutarch says that Olympias, on the eve of consummation of her marriage to Philip, dreamed that her womb was struck by a thunderbolt, causing a flame to spread far and wide until it died away. Even King Philip is reported to have dreamed of sealing his wife's tomb with a seal engraved with a lion's image. Ancient Greece was full of prophecies and portents. Alexander just happens to be the subject of a great many of them. In addition to all of this, he was groomed as a child to one day rule a powerful empire, leading Philip to focus intensely on his education. During his childhood, Alexander was educated under the tutelage of one of his relatives, the stern Leonidas of Epirus. King Philip hired him to teach his son mathematics, how to ride the horse, and archery. Leonidas himself struggled to handle his rebellious student. Under his tutelage, Alexander had to endure hardships such as forced marches. The next tutor of Alexander was Lysimachus, who tried to capture this restless boy's attention by role play. Alexander was delighted to impersonate the warrior Achilles. In 343 BC, King Philip II hired the philosopher Aristotle to be the tutor of his son and heir. In the Temple of Nymphs near Naousa, Aristotle taught Alexander, who was 13 at that time, and a group of his friends philosophy, poetry, drama, science, religion, and politics. Under the tutelage of Aristotle, Alexander developed a passion for Homer's work. The heroes of the Iliad inspired him to become a mighty warrior. Later, Aristotle gave him an annotated copy of it, which Alexander carried on his military campaigns. The royal dynasty of Macedonia was the Argead family. According to their own histories, they were originally from Argos in the Peloponnese. They were the founding dynasty of Macedonia and ruled it from around 700 to 310 BC. One thing that was unique to Macedonia is that everyone agreed that only an Argead could become king. For whatever reason, nobody outside of the family would ever rule Macedonia. This didn't create the stability that you think it would. The Argeads tended to live long if they weren't assassinated, and they tended to have a lot of children, creating a lot of potential claimants to the throne. This constant instability was too tempting for their neighbors, and Macedonia was constantly being invaded. By the time Philip became king, Macedonia was so weak it was on the verge of being dismembered. The kingdom did have some advantages, though. It was geographically large, had good farmland, and an abundance of timber, which was essential to building both temples and ships. Philip would solve most of Macedonia's problems, though, by the time Alexander became king. Philip also left his son the most dangerous fighting force in the world, along with the most skilled generals alive. Alexander was blessed that the army had superb leadership. This was one of the most talented group of individuals to ever take the field. These men really fell into two different camps, those of Philip's generation and those of Alexander's generation. Those from Philip's generation include august figures such as Parmenio, Antipater, Perdiccas, Cleotus the Black, and Antigonus One-Eye. Those from Alexander's generation include Hephaestion, Craterus, and Ptolemy. Most of these men would later become kings in their own right after Alexander's death. With all the advantages that Alexander had, was his conquest of Persia inevitable? We do plan on giving our take on this question, but we'll do so at the end of this series of videos. In the next video, we will discuss Macedonia before Philip became king, and the situation in Greece more generally. Stay tuned.